earlier this year, a relative of ours cancelled a dinner appointment. That was unusual because they don't usually cancel the dinner appointments that they have. We get together with them 2 or 3 times a year. Then we learned that they were handling a family tragedy. The husband of a very dear friend of the family had jumped from the Story Bridge holding his infant son, and they were both killed. The relationship between that husband and wife had broken down. The most painful experience you can go through is the pain of a broken relationship. The most painful of all is where that relationship was the relationship of a husband and wife. The breakup of any close relationship is painful, as many, probably all of you would know. It's always painful for at least one of the parties, maybe the other one isn't affected. But nothing can be more painful than where a marriage breaks up, again, at least for one of the parties. Why are relationships so fragile? Why do marriages break up? In Australia today, 1 in every 3 marriages ends in divorce. Though that doesn't really tell the whole story because most people now live together without getting married. In fact, 3/4 of those that do get married have lived together first. And the breakup rate among live-ins is much higher than it is for marrieds. So that now any relationship, married or live-in, is more likely to break up than to stay together. So what have we missed? Why do close relationships like this not last? And what is the secret of an enduring relationship? The secret is in just 2 words that we read there in Hosea chapter 3. Then the Lord said to me, "Go again, love a woman. Go again, love a woman." The secret is in those 2 words, the word go and the word love, as long as we understand what those 2 words mean. And we'll get to that. First of all, let's look at the relationship the Bible is talking about here. That relationship began back there in chapter 1 with another command. In verse 2, the Lord began to speak by Hosea, and the Lord said to Hosea, and this was the command that the Lord gave to his prophet Hosea, he said to Hosea, "Go, take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry." God's command to his prophet Hosea was to go and take a wife who is a harlot, who is a prostitute, a woman who has a lot of bratty kids as a result of her sinful lifestyle. Or maybe she wasn't yet like this. It's possible that God was here directing Hosea to a woman who God assured him would soon turn to prostitution. Maybe she wasn't a prostitute at this stage, but Hosea is being directed to marry this woman with the certain knowledge that this is where the marriage is going to end up. Soon after he has married her, she would be unfaithful to him, and then she would leave him, most probably alone, forsaken, and looking after a handful of bratty kids that weren't his own. So, what on earth is going on here? Why would God command his prophet to enter into a marriage which he knew in advance would only bring lots of pain, lots of heartache? Well, because the Lord wanted to teach you and me something about ourselves. You'll notice that when God says to him in verse 2, "Go, take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry," he immediately adds, "For this is why I'm asking you to do this strange thing, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord." So God is using this tragic relationship between the prophet and his wayward wife to show the people of that time what their relationship with him, with God, was really like. And more than that, it shows you and me what our relationship with God is like. This tragic relationship between the prophet and his wife is really telling us what our relationship with God is like. But it's also telling us how that relationship can be repaired. Let's look at the cause of the breakdown of this relationship. In one word, it's fickleness. Having been commanded by God to do so, Hosea then does what God commands. So God had said, go take yourself a wife of harlotry, and then verse 3, so he went and took Gomer, the wife of Diblaim. He went and took her. He took her to be his bride. She became pregnant, and in verse 3 it says she conceived and bore him a son. She bore a son to him, so that's good. This is probably his son. In verse 4, then the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. And then in verse 6, she conceived again and bore a daughter. And this time it doesn't say she bore him a daughter, she bore a daughter to him. So it's a bit suspicious, and in verse 6 it goes on and says, God said to him, call her name Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, and I will utterly take them away. Lo-Ruhamah, meaning no more mercy. Or you could perhaps translate it, no more love. So what does that mean, no more love? Does that, Hosea think, is this actually my daughter? And then in verse 8, when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then God said, call his name Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. You are not my people. So Hosea's worst fears are now confirmed. This is not his son. These are not his people. Why is Gomer doing this? Why is she being unfaithful to her husband? Why are you and I unfaithful to God? A few reasons. First one is dissatisfaction. Gomer was dissatisfied. Or more to the point, she longs for what she doesn't have. You go to chapter 2 and verse 5, and there halfway through that verse, chapter 2 and verse 5, she says, I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water and my wool and my linen and my oil and my drink. So she's going to leave her husband. She's going to chase after other lovers, plural, not singular. And why? Because she is dissatisfied with the life that her husband has given her. She is dissatisfied with what he has to offer, and she imagines that if she goes after other lovers, then she will get everything that she wants from life. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Why are you and I unfaithful to God? We become unfaithful to God because we are dissatisfied with what God gives us. We become dissatisfied with life. We want what God has not given us. The Bible says each of us is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires. When he's drawn away by what he wants. When he's drawn away by his own desires and is enticed. We are dissatisfied with what we have. We want what the world offers. Each of us is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and is enticed. And it goes on and says, then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and dissatisfaction leads to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren, is what James says. The second reason she was unfaithful was because of selfishness. I mean, look again at what she says there in chapter 2 and verse 5. She says, I will go after other lovers, after my lovers. And then she says, who give me my bread and my water and my wool and my linen and my oil and my drink. And that is what sin is like. It is completely self-centered. It's completely selfish. We sell our souls to the highest bidder as long as we can get what we want. Now, we were made in the image of God. You and I were made for God. He is our highest good. He is our chief end. And we find our greatest fulfillment when we enjoy God. But when some new pleasure or some new distraction comes along, we forget God. And we sell ourselves to that pleasure or that distraction as long as we can get that pleasure or distraction. For example, we might be lured by the thought of being able to make more money at work. And so we forget God, we forget to put God first in our lives, we forget to seek God first, and we prostitute ourselves instead to our jobs, all for the sake of bread and water and wool and linen and oil and drink. Or it might be actual adultery. It might be a relationship that's taking you away from God instead of towards God. It might be a relationship that is just plain sinful. But you sell yourself to that relationship instead of being in love with God. But really, it's just selfishness. The third reason we are unfaithful is because of ignorance. Gomer was ignorant. She did not know. It was a willful, it was a sinful ignorance. She's now left her husband, and she's now chasing her lovers with promises of bread and water and wool and linen and oil and drink. But she doesn't know who is really sustaining her. And God complains in chapter 2 and verse 8 and says, for she did not know, it's interchanging here between Gomer and Israel, she did not know that I gave her grain and new wine and oil, and I multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. I gave it to them, but they're actually using it to worship Baal. The Lord had given Israel all these things. And you get the picture as to what's happening here with Hosea and Gomer. Gomer's now left. She's gone off with one of her lovers, and perhaps Hosea has heard something. He's heard that his wife is gradually spiralling downwards as we all spiral downwards in pursuit of sin. And now these lovers that she was chasing have begun to dry up. And as she becomes more used and abused, she's no longer as attractive as she once was. And now in desperation she's living with some no good, sleazy character who barely gives her enough to keep her. Hosea hears about this, so he gets together a basket of food, goes round to where she's living, knocks on the door. But instead of his wife coming to the door, this sleaze bag comes to the door, who's now living with his wife. Who are you? He asks. I'm Hosea. I'm Gomer's husband. The man starts back and thinks there's going to be some sort of confrontation, but instead Hosea simply hands her the basket of food. He said, here, I've come to give this to her. Please give it to her. Please tell her I still love her. And then after the door shuts, he waits nearby. He's hoping that he can hear his wife's voice and maybe that she's okay. But instead he hears a man's voice. And he hears the man saying, look, honey, look what I've brought you. I thought you might like something special. And then he hears his wife's voice saying, oh, thank you so much. What would you like to do for me in return? Do for you in return? She did not know that I gave her grain and new wine and oil, and I multiplied her silver and her gold, which they then prepared for Baal to worship their own gods. God has given you so many gifts. But then we take those gifts that God has given us and we use them to worship other gods. Just to take one example, God has given you a mind. He's given you an intellect. In one of our hymns we sing to God, "Take my mind, that I may use every power as you, God, shall choose." Lord, take my mind, that I may use every power as you, God, shall choose. And God has given you a mind so that above everything else you will know him. He's given you a mind, the Bible says, so that you should seek him. But instead you use your mind, you use that mind that God has given you not to seek God. Maybe you even use your mind to reason that God doesn't care. I'm using my mind to think God doesn't care. Maybe sometimes even to think God doesn't exist. You use God's gifts to turn away from God instead of to seek him. Or you use that mind that God has given you, to chase after other gods. Perhaps you use your mind to chase after the God of popularity. You want to get people to put you up on a pedestal, to be worshipping you instead of to be worshipping God, seeking God themselves. Or you use that mind you've got to chase after the God of pride, using your mind to promote yourself in the academic world is more important than your relationship with God. Or you use that mind that God has given you to chase after the God of possessions, using your mind to fill your life with possessions instead of filling your life with God. Take my mind, that I may use every power as you, God, shall choose. But instead, we use our minds, the gift that God has given us, to chase after other gods. We do not know that the mind that we use to chase after other gods has been given to us by God. So what is the consequence of relationship breakdown? You could probably sum up in one word: futility. The first consequence of the breakdown of this relationship was divorce. Consequence of Gomer's actions was that Hosea divorced her. He can no longer communicate with her, and so he tells his children, who may or may not be his children, he tells them in verse 2 of chapter 2, "Bring charges against your mother, bring charges, for she is not my wife, nor am I her husband." So Gomer's adulteries have turned this marriage into such a sham that it's no longer possible to pretend that she is really his wife. Our sins divorce us from God. They bring about a separation. The Bible says, "Your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he will no longer hear you." All communication has broken down. God is your rightful master. You belong to God. Every way that we go our own way instead of God's way is being unfaithful to him. It is spiritual adultery. And this leads to the irretrievable breakdown of the relationship between you and God. It leads to divorce. Divorce leads to exposure. God warns in verse 3 of chapter 2, he says, "I will strip her naked and expose her as in the day she was born." Now maybe up to now your sin has largely been covered up. I mean, most people have no idea how much you and I sin, our secret actions, our secret thoughts, our secret resentments. But Jesus said there will come a day when there is nothing covered that will not be revealed and nothing hidden that will not be known. And Jesus added, "Whatever you have spoken in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have spoken in the inner rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops." One day, our shame will be uncovered for all to see. Nothing will be hidden anymore. "I will strip her naked and expose her as in the day she was born." And also, as in any divorce, the consequence is a great emptiness. sin makes us thirsty. And going on in verse 3 of chapter 2, God says, I will make her like a wilderness. I will set her like a dry land. I will slay her with thirst. Sin makes us thirsty. It leaves us feeling empty. Unfaithfulness to God, like unfaithfulness in marriage, leaves us feeling like dirt. It leaves us feeling completely empty, like nothing. Hollywood, so often portrays adultery as this wonderful, self-fulfilling experience after a dreary and unsatisfying marriage. It is a lie. It is all a lie. That sin, like all sin, is unfaithfulness to God, and it leaves you feeling entirely empty. In her emptiness, Gomer decided to return to her husband. In verse 7 of chapter 2, about halfway through, it says, Then she will say, I will go and return to my first husband, for then it was better for me than now. Now, this is not out of love for her husband. She simply feels that, she needs a fresh supply of bread and water and wool and linen and oil and drink. She has ignored, she has mistreated, she has misused, she has abused her husband up till now. And now suddenly she thinks she'll just pack her bags, turn up on the doorstep, and everything will be hunky-dory. Do you think like that? Have you ignored God until now? You're living however you like. But you think, one day, when I need God, I'll get it sorted out. I'll seek God then. He'll take care of me. That's his business. But Hosea was in no mood to take his wife back. And nor did he have to. And nor does God have to take us back just because we wake up one morning and think, today's the day, today I'm going to get everything right with God. God's got to take me back. Worse though, the time will come when you can't return, even if you thought you wanted to. And that is because sin brings us into bondage. And by the time you get to Hosea chapter 3, Hosea's wife is now a slave. She has sold herself, or someone has sold her perhaps, into slavery. Apparently her life had spiraled down and down and down out of control until she was left destitute and poverty-stricken and being sold into slavery. So that when Hosea goes looking for her in chapter 3, he finds her in the slave market. Nothing could be more degrading than to be found in a slave market. But the closest parallel we have in Australia, the one that we know about, is, you might be aware there's a lot of slavery goes on in the world today, but it's all under wraps, possibly in Australia. But the closest parallel that you're likely to see here in Australia would be a second-hand car auction. Slaves were traded much the same way as second-hand cars are today. In the Roman slave market, around about the time of Hosea, a little bit later on, slaves were held in wooden pens or iron cages, and when it came time for the auction, they were displayed to their best advantage, much like second-hand cars today. They were put on platforms or revolving stands so that people could see them as they were turned around. And like cars, slaves came with guarantees. If a slave had defects not shown in his or her notice of goods of sale, the dealer had to take the slave back, or he had to make good the buyer's loss. And that notice of goods of sale guaranteed that the slaves being sold were sound, that any faults had been pointed out, and because of this, slaves were commonly exposed for sale naked, and they were poked and they were prodded, much like you might go around kicking a car's tyres. And just like a used car, you could get rid of it however you pleased when it started to cost you more than it was earning. Gomer has been sold into slavery. Sin sells us into slavery. Jesus said, whoever commits sin is the slave of sin. Whoever commits sin is the slave of sin. We are helpless. By our sin, we have sold ourselves into slavery. Or as it is in Romans chapter 6, it says, you were all slaves of sin leading to death. In that same passage in Romans chapter 6, it says, when you were slaves of sin, what fruit did you have then in the things of which you are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. You sell yourself into slavery by your sin. You can't help yourself even if you tried. You can't get out of slavery even if you try. And this is a slavery to death. The Bible says the wages of sin is death. Initially, we think that the wages of sin are pretty good. And we are pretty pleased with ourselves, with the great stack of possessions and achievements we've gotten for ourselves simply because we've ignored God. We've continued on in sin. And look at all that we've got for ourselves by doing it that way. Certainly done a lot better than those silly Christians that try and live an honest life. And the wages of sin seem pretty good at first. But in the end, the wages of sin is death. Let me tell you about the cure of relationship breakdown. In a word, the cure is faithfulness. Not your faithfulness. Your faithfulness can never make amends for years of unfaithfulness. But the faithfulness that restores a broken relationship is God's. It is God's faithfulness. And that is your only hope. And God's faithfulness is summed up in just two words. They are the two words that we looked at the beginning. They are the two words which are the secret of a lasting relationship. They are the two words there in chapter 3 and verse 1, where the Lord said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is committing adultery. They are the two words, go and love. The secret of any lasting relationship is in those two words. Whether it is the relationship of a marriage, or whether it is our relationship one with another in the church, or best of all, whether it is the relationship between God and those that are eventually His. It all depends upon those two words, go and love. Go is the word of initiative. The breach between Hosea and his wife was cured because Hosea took the initiative. God said, go, and Hosea obeyed, and he went. Gomer couldn't go. She couldn't do anything to help herself. She was a slave. She couldn't help herself even if she wanted to. The only hope now would be if Hosea took the initiative and he found her. So Hosea takes the initiative. He has to go. He has to go to the degrading and dehumanising slave market where she is and find her there. But remember, God will have Hosea go through all this pain and suffering to explain to you what your relationship with God and what God's relationship with us is all about. What Gomer did explains what we have done to God. Where Gomer ended up explains where sin leaves us in our relationship with God. And most wonderful of all, how Hosea got Gomer out of that mess explains to us how God gets us out of the mess that we're in. It is because God takes the initiative. God took the initiative in salvation by providing a Saviour. And that Saviour, who is Jesus, took the initiative by coming to this earth. How degrading that must have been for Jesus to come to this earth. We have no idea what a spiritual pigsty we've made of this earth by our sin. Just as pigs have no idea that they live in a pigsty. And we have no idea just how filthy and spiritually corrupt we've made this earth that God made. But God took the initiative. And God planned our salvation. And God sent his Son to this earth. And God sought us out, just as Hosea went to the degrading slave market to seek out his wife. But there is another word. There is another word that is needed before this relationship can be repaired. And that is the word love. Love is the word of covenant. If go is the word of initiative, then love is the word of covenant. The only reason any relationship with God will endure is because that relationship is based on a covenant. It is based upon covenant love. The only love that does endure in this world or the next is what is covenant love. You know where marriages fail? Not long ago, another couple I know broke up. I had known this couple for many years. At one time, they'd even been in the same church I was in for some time. I had had extensive times counselling them. I got to know them really well. And over the years, the relationship had at times been stormy, at times the wife storming out on the husband, but they got back together and it survived. But after they lost touch, they went off their own way, the wife was looking elsewhere other than her husband for her primary support. She wasn't technically committing adultery, but she was not relying upon a husband. And her husband started to look around, and he had one affair and another. I think he was having two at the same time. And then he announced to his wife, "I'm leaving you." Why? Because I've realised I just don't love you anymore. I've realised I just don't love you anymore. They're the most painful words that anyone in a marriage can hear. Now, some would say this is the reason that marriages break up, because one party doesn't love the other anymore. It is not true. Marriages don't break up because one party doesn't love the other anymore. Marriages break up because one party never knew what love was to start with. At least one party never understood what covenant love is. They think that love is what is portrayed by Hollywood. It is this burning passion to unite two bodies. And where that dies, love dies. It's grounded in the way you feel, and where feelings evaporate, so does love. It's flushed cheeks and a racing heart and clammy hands and hormones coursing through your veins. It is spontaneous, it is effortless, and because it is all these, it is entirely self-centered. It's entirely focused upon how you feel. Love, true love, is never effortless. And if it is self-centered, if it is focused on how you feel, it is not love, not covenant. All marriages fail because at least one party to the marriage doesn't understand love. They have bought the lie of the Hollywood version, and they think that is love. Love is not grounded in feelings. Notice that I said that very carefully. It's not grounded in feelings. Feelings come and go. They will certainly come where there is true love. Other times they will go. But true love is grounded in covenant. And the only love that can last is the love which is grounded in covenant. And you know, that is true of any lasting relationship. It is true of relationships even with one another in the church. Our relationships with each other in the church survive and they grow Because we have covenanted together. We don't give up when our feelings let us down. We don't depend upon our feelings to maintain our membership in the church, because our membership with one another is based upon covenant, not upon feelings. And covenant means commitment. It means commitment to another and to their well-being. It is the opposite of self-centered. It is other-centered. That is the only true love that lasts. And that is the love that God is telling Hosea here to exercise when he told Hosea, go and love again. This is a love which is prepared to sell everything to buy his wife back. Hosea goes to the slave auction. The bidding starts, bidding for a woman, much as you would bid for a piece of meat in a butcher's shop. 10 shekels. Silver shekel was worth maybe $1,000. 12 shekels. 12 and a half. Then Hosea makes his bid. 14 shekels. And he's barely got out his bid when there's another. 15 shekels. The world is bidding for the soul of this woman. 15 shekels and 1.5 homers of barley. I mean, that's Hosea's final bid. It's all he has. He's bid his last $1,000. Done, says the auctioneer. Get your goods, take them, pay up, go home. And Hosea pays, and he fetches her, and he takes her home amid the sneers and jeers of the crowd who don't think she's worth it. But to Hosea, she is worth every penny. Because he has covenanted to love her. He has chosen to love her. That's what covenant means. It means it is a deliberate choice on your part. Our society doesn't understand that. The person I just mentioned who left his wife because he didn't love her anymore, he doesn't understand that. And he was, how can you choose to love someone? Either you love them or you don't. You either fall in love or you fall out of love. But you can't command someone to love someone any more than you command someone to love eating spinach or peas or whatever. It's just not something you can command. But in the Bible, love is a command. Husbands are commanded to love their wives in Ephesians 5:25. Wives are commanded to love their husbands in Titus 2 and verse 4. And in fact, what is the second greatest command in the Bible? Everyone knows what the second greatest command in the Bible is. Second greatest commandment, Jesus said it, love your neighbour as yourself. That was a command. So if the Bible is right, love can be commanded. Covenant love can be commanded. Covenant love is a choice. And thankfully, it was God's choice when he came to find lost sinners like you and me. God found you and me with nothing to love. He didn't love you and me because we are lovable. But he found you and me stripped of everything, covered with the shame of our sin, sold into the slave market. As we say in that hymn, nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. Naked come to thee for dress, helpless look to thee for grace. Foul I to the fountain fly, wash me, Saviour, or I die. Well, the Bible puts it this way in that passage we read from Romans chapter 5. It says, when we were still without strength. It says, while we were still sinners. It says, when we were enemies. What did God do? God demonstrates his own love toward us. God chose to love us. He chose to love covenant love. And what price did covenant love pay in order to redeem us in the slave market? When we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. When we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son. What a price God paid. There was nothing more he could pay. He paid his last asset when he paid in the death of his Son. Covenant love always costs. It is not cheap. It is not effortless. Because covenant love is not about what you can get for yourself. Covenant love is about what you can give for the other. And the cross of Jesus Christ is covenant love at its very best. Do you want your relationship with God restored? When Hosea brought Gomer out of slavery, he said this to her in chapter 3 and verse 3. And I said to her, you shall stay with me many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man. So too will I be toward you. Well, the NIV is a bit clearer there. It says, you are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will live with you. You are to live with me from now on, and I will live with you. I mean, imagine that. Gomer had been bought as a slave. She was now Hosea's property, and he could do with her whatever he liked. And he remembered all the sleepless nights that she had given him, and he remembered all the humiliation and all the pain that he'd been through, and he remembered all the times that he wanted to kill her. And now he could. And no one could do anything about it. But instead he said to her, from now on you will live with me as my wife, and I will live with you. God could do to you and me whatever he wants, and he would be entirely justified. After the way you and I have treated God, after the way you and I have despised God, and after the way you and I have humiliated God, and after the way you and I have been thankless and we've thanked false gods for things that God has given to us. And yes, even if God consigned you and me to suffer forever in hell, it would still be less than you and I deserve. But instead, he brings us to his home, and he speaks kindly to us, and he says, from now on, you will live with me, and I will live with you. Imagine. And just one more thing. God adds this, or Hosea adds this. He says, from now on, you will live with me, in chapter 3, verse 3, and using the NIV translation, you must not prostitute yourself anymore, and I will live with you. You must not prostitute yourself anymore, and I will live with you. If we are going to live with God, if you're going to live with God, you must live with him, not against him. And that means you give up your old way of life, and it means you no longer prostitute your soul by going after other gods, and it means you no longer have all those pleasures and distractions and even relationships coming before God. But only God. Hosea took the initiative. Hosea took Gomer back home. Hosea forgave Gomer and lived with her again. But, he says, Gomer, you have to be willing to come home. And you have to be willing to live with me, not against me. And you have to be willing to give up your old way of life of prostitution. And God takes the initiative in seeking you and me out too. God invites you to come home and to live with him. But you must be willing to come home. You must be willing to come home the only way that you can come home, which is by trusting in Jesus Christ and his sacrifice upon the cross. And you must be willing to live with God in a home where the atmosphere is different. That the atmosphere in this home is going to be godly. Do you really want to live in that sort of atmosphere? Or do you want to go on living the way you have? You must hate the sin that has kept you away from God and from his home for so long. And you must be willing to give up your old way of life. You must be willing to embrace a whole new way of life in Jesus Christ. God takes the initiative because you can't. And God pays the price because you can't. And God invites you to live with him by faith. But will you? That is the question.